And it was horrifying. What I predicted was today's world. So I became an environmental and humanitarian activist. Now, what's wrecking us basically is greed and aggression. If instead you mentioned religion, all the great religions and philosophies, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, the Confucian philosophy, Immanuel Kant, the Mayans, all had the same message, which is the message of universal love.
Welcome back to the Purple Political Podcast, a podcast here where it's meant to have very productive discussions, potentially find a solution, and I bring a guest in to have an interesting conversation about a particular topic that may be beneficial to everybody listening in, of course, or viewing on YouTube or watching one of the clips. So a lot of content out there. So today, my guest here is Dr. Bob Rich. I'm gonna let him introduce himself and tell you all what he's about.
Okay, well, I'm an Australian storyteller with 19 published books, some of them award winners. And I have retired from 5 different occupations so far, but I'm still going strong as a professional grandfather. Anybody born after 1993 qualifies as my grandchild. Anybody born from when I was 25 qualifies as my child. They only have to apply. And I've got grandchildren and children and brothers and sisters all over the planet that I keep in contact with. And the job specification for a professional grandfather is that everything I do is working for a future for the young people of today and a future worth surviving in. Will that do?
Yeah, I think that was a great introduction. Very interesting perspective. I definitely respect it, considering that people in general should definitely be looking a lot more sympathetically to their fellow individual that's not inherently part of their family or their close friend group. So that's a very interesting perspective, of course. So today we're going to be diving into a more broad topic and of discussion because I do think there's some ideas that need to be deliberated upon, of course, and what we're going to be diving in today is in reference to global culture. As you guys heard, Dr. Rich, is that fine to call you?
Bob,
Bob.
Bob.
Bob is from Australia, so he has a very much different perspective on society compared to me being from America, of course. But there is understanding that there is certain issues in society in terms of politics, in terms of culture. So I'll let Bob dive into it and go from there for the most part.
Okay, I said I'm a storyteller, so I'll start with a story. In 1972, I had 2 tiny children. So I asked myself, what kind of world did I bring them into? It was also my last year of my PhD. It was good stuff, but I was bored witless. And pre-internet days, every Wednesday was library research. And I sat in the library reading journal articles and so on until I was ready to fall asleep. But I couldn't fall asleep because I was Mr. Rich, the lecturer, to um, some 900 students. So when I couldn't stand it anymore, I read in futurology, an entirely different discipline. No, that's not Nostradamus, but taking current trends and then extrapolating them. You make a set of assumptions and see where current trends would take us. And even though a computer then had less power than your mobile phone, far less power, and it filled the whole room, I could do computer simulations. And it was horrifying. What I predicted was today's world. So I became an environmental and humanitarian activist. Now, what's wrecking us basically is greed and aggression. If instead you mentioned religion, all the great religions and philosophies, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, the Confucian philosophy, Immanuel Kant, the Mayans, all had the same message, which is the message of universal love. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, do unto others as you would have done to you, and so on. If people genuinely did that, I mean, people advocate hate in the name of Christianity. I find it unbelievable. Certain versions of Islam do horrible things to women. Muhammad didn't. It's a corruption of religion. So what we have now is a global culture that encourages the worst in human nature, particularly greed, hate, fear, aggression, and short-term thinking. If we could transform, and this is what's killing us, because of greed, a very small percentage, like 1% of humanity, has more resources at its control than most of the others. People are starving, people are homeless, people are suffering because other people have more than they can use, and then they still want more without limit. My view of money is often it costs more than it's worth. And my view of not just people, but all sentient beings, they're all family. We're all cousins on this little ball. So another way of putting the same thing is all sentient beings, including octopuses and elephants and possibly great trees, there's some evidence for that, all sentient beings are apprentice Buddhas, apprentice Jesuses. So how does an apprentice learn? You learn from masters. For example, the Dalai Lama says, my religion is kindness. The purpose of enlightenment is to be of service. And when you remember, you don't have to be perfect. When you remember, you do as if you were enlightened. And enlightenment is not a state, but an instant. So right now, this minute, I feel enlightened, so I'm enlightened. 5 minutes from now, I might sink back into being not enlightened. Somebody like the Dalai Lama, or I believe Pope Francis, or Gandhi in the last stage of his life, or Mandela after he was out of jail, they're enlightened beings on an ongoing status. That's the aim. That's where we should be. If we all did that, the problems would not disappear, but we could create the kind of world that's good to live in, where suffering people are treated with compassion instead of disdain. So, what do you think about that?
I think the sentiment is something I truly appreciate. That's why when I used to be religious. I'm not much anymore. I'm agnostic nowadays. The underlying theme behind religion is something I always appreciated, in the sense that you want to treat everybody with love, with compassion. That's why at no point I would ever tell anybody your religion is wrong, especially if you're getting good out of it. So there's a certain sense of sentimentality that is necessary for society and humanity as a whole. But in terms of, like, if I look at it with, like, from my point of view, it will be nearly impossible to make that theme universal in terms of, like, all people accept that type of ideology, because inherently, as you said prior, there are certain things that people care about more, and you could attribute that to greed. I attribute it to more so that people, at the end of the day, the innate core behind all humans, in my opinion, is self-preservation, and the way they utilize it could be more corrupt, more so than others, or more fulfilling, like overextending the preservation to your family, to your friends, to even larger groups. But you would have to teach that to people in a way that everybody will accept in terms of ideologically, culturally, and socially. And that type of teaching, as of right now, I don't think is very realistic. It's a bit utopian for me, but I do think the teachings are necessary and should be taught. So my question to you is, how do you think something like this teachings, that's how I'm gonna put it, or just like way of living, how do you think that should be incorporated either in culture or into politics, in your opinion?
Well, things started going wrong about 10,000 years ago. Until then, there was no such thing as war in most places. There was conflict, but the Australian Aboriginal cultures is something I've studied. A conflict between two groups would be shouting insults at each other. Somebody gets speared in the leg and they go home. In contrast, very close by in New Guinea, there have been many thousands of years of mutual genocide. Just, you sneak into some village, kill a few people as vengeance from them having done it to you, and it goes on and on. And the other difference is that the Australian Aborigines were hunter-gatherers living as part of the land and thinking of themselves as being part of the land, while in New Guinea, they practiced agriculture. And I think the change started with the invention of agriculture and animal husbandry.
Well,
Because
what was the second thing you said? Something husbandry?
animal husbandry, domesticating animals.
Okay, understood.
Horses, cattle, sheep, pigs, and so on. And, an exponential trend, like compound interest, I have to do it in mirror image so it looks right, starts as almost nothing, builds very slowly, and then reaches a breaking point and down it comes. Okay, in the sustainable cultures that have been studied, for example, the Kalahari Bushmen in Africa, there is a small group in the Philippines, Australian Aborigines. There have been a few others in modern times. There is no sense of private possession. Okay, I make a spear. I use that spear. It's my spear in a sense, but it doesn't feel part of me and I'm not part of it. If I own anything, it belongs to the group, and the unit is the group. If someone contravenes the rules of the group, the ultimate punishment is being banished. And when you're banished, you die. Just think. And so greed is simply not possible in such a culture because there's no point. When more efficient ways of growing food allow a build-up of population, then inequality arose. So we can't go back because there are too many people, but we can still lift the philosophy from those cultures. We can adapt their way of looking at the world to our situation. And I think that's perfectly possible.
Yeah.
And also, as I said, we've been given the message dozens of times. If you read Confucius' writings, or what has survived, or the Buddha's, it's very similar to Jesus's, quite independently. And you don't have to be perfect. You just have to do your best. So I don't think it's a utopia or any sort of unreal thinking. Anybody can do it. And look, a great many people start by being greedy, start by being violent, and then they grow out of it. Perhaps the most influential was a man called Ashoka, who was the younger son of an emperor in what is now India. And basically he murdered all his older brothers, took over, and then created the first great Indian empire. And he was called Ashoka the Cruel. Then he somehow encountered the Buddha's teachings. He was some hundreds of years after the Buddha. And he became enlightened. And he started treating all his subjects in a magnanimous, kind way. And basically he established a paradise in India. And then he sent out missionaries, for example, to China. And we now have Buddhism because of Ashoka as much as because of Gautama. And there are quite a number of 19th century robber barons, if you like, who established became the first millions. And then they had a change of heart and became major philanthropists. But you don't have to do the first. Now, I was very fortunate in that I had a teacher when I was young, who was my uncle. And he had two goals in life: to screw as many women as possible and to make as much money as possible, never mind what harm he did. So early on, he stole something from me when I was a boy. And I described the story in two of my books. I'm basically here because I want to promote my ideas, and that means I want to promote my books. Not because I want to sell them, but because I want to spread my ideas. And the publishers of my books do need to make a reasonable profit. So they need the money. But anyway, before he died, he built that into 20 millions. So he was my teacher because I said, I don't want to be like him. So I've been a faithful husband. I've never played up on my wife. And we've only been married for 55 and a half years. We're still having a go. And I've realized, as I said, money it often costs more than it's worth. And basically, only two things matter in life: what you take with you when you die and what you leave behind in the hearts of others. Everything else is monopoly money. When you lie on your deathbed, what will you regret? That you didn't make $1 million, or some acts of unkindness that you did that caused harm to somebody? What will you value? The good you did, or all the money your heirs can squabble over? So when you've had enough, why bother making more? It's a sort of a game. But a game with terrible consequences.
Yeah. I definitely understand a lot of what you're saying. And at the end of the day, I think we can very much both agree that the value of community and love, which I think are the more core things, if I had to simplify it to anybody that's listening, the core things that people should attribe to their daily life of community and love. The only reason why I said utopia earlier is in order to establish a society that's like as similar to the example that you elicited earlier, it would have to have a authoritarian government or a complete representative government. And though both of those things are unrealistic, and we, in terms of the trend of society, it's more problematic, more so than not, to have an authoritarian government, because you can't trust that someone will adhere to their greed, get power, and ruin everything for everybody else. It's just one of those things, which is why checks and balances is so essential. But I do think that the teachings of American society, in terms of the wanting to, in order to be happy, you have to have a lot of money, you have to have a lot of fame, you have to have a lot of influence. That's getting uh the ideas being increased even more so nowadays because of social media, technology, technology making people look however they want. These Western ideals is perpetuating the idea that everybody can be an individual and successful. Social media makes everybody think that if I get this many followers, views, clicks, then I'm important, I matter. But at the end of the day, there is a realization that, for the most part, America is becoming more toxic and mental illness is becoming more of a problem because none of this stuff gives meaning to an individual at the end of the day. Something like community, something like love, would give them the meaning that they're searching for and yearning for. It's just what you have to do and what you would have to kind of relate, and creating books and giving books to or people getting the messages from your books is a useful tool. But in terms of attributing that to current society, sure, you can use social media, YouTube, podcasts, and whatnot. I guess the biggest way to do that is like incorporating these teachings, or at the very least relaying these messages in a more personal level in something like schools or in like uh small communities. So how do you think the best way for you to relay this message of community, love, to look beyond the things that we just referred to in terms of these intangible things that people want to utilize to find meaning? How do you think it's the best way to communicate these messages, especially to the younger generation, because they're the ones kind of trying to figure out their way more so than anything else nowadays?
Well, many of them have woken up. They're on my team. Well, I'm on their team or something. But anyway, the first requirement is to have fun. Life is too short for the seriousness it deserves. We mustn't get too heavy about it. Look, I've got two separate points. One of them I've set out in an essay which is on my blog. If you go to Bobbing Around, and you've got the link, which I presume will be in the blurb for the show, but it's bobrich18.wordpress.com, and there's an essay there, How to Change the World, and that sets out what the problem is and how to solve it. And basically, consumer society is built on unhappiness. Right. Suppose that I buy a device, say a wristwatch. I bought this 25 years ago. That's terrible for the watch industry, isn't it?
True.
Yeah. It's I'm sabotaging economic growth because I'm satisfied with my watch. Since 1978, my wife and I have lived below the poverty line of our country, and we live like royalty. We're happy and contented not because we buy everything possible, but because we don't need to. Okay? If you fall for the thing that you must have the newest, must have the best, what was the best 2 years ago is no longer any good, and you keep buying, again, you must become dissatisfied with what you've got. So it's a perpetual treadmill. And of course, if you're an unhappy little consumer, then you've also got to be an unhappy little worker to generate that money. And you can have two people in the household both working full time and still being in hardship, because the world is organized so. And you can opt out by wanting less, which is, of course, the Buddhist message and the Christian message as well. It's not the not having that's the problem, but the wanting. Now, the other aspect is about mental health. One of the things I retired from is as a psychotherapist. Before I retired, I was the most senior ones in my country. Had positions of responsibility and so on. But anyway, I'm pretty good. I mean, one of my hobbies nowadays is people send me emails of despair, and I've got the gift of healing words, and I can set them onto a good path. And that's how I acquire my grandchildren. Okay, so the first step is the 7 magic bullets. It's very difficult to be depressed, anxious, angry, subject to addictions if you have the 7 magic bullets at full value in your life. And these are, in order of ease of implementation, how is it out there to do? First is refreshing sleep, not too much or too little. Second is good nourishment, not too much and not too little, and stuff that's good for you instead of the horrible stuff that people eat. Third is creativity. And that's not so much painting or writing music or whatever. They can qualify, but they can be done in a hack way. It's doing anything in a creative way. Washing dishes, cleaning a house, weeding your garden can be done creatively. And the next one is fun. It's extremely difficult to manage to stay sad while you're laughing. Then there is social connectedness, which is something that you refer to, small communities, being connected to people. And I'm an extreme introvert. When I researched social connectedness, I found you need a minimum of 3, possibly overlapping groups that you belong to. And although I'm an extreme introvert, I found I belong to upward of 20. And they change from time to time, but there's always something like 20. And the last and most important and the most difficult is meaning. And the meaning, the best meaning to have, I come back full circle to the Dalai Lama. My religion is kindness. The aim of enlightenment is to be of service. If you do things that benefit others, that puts meaning into your life. You can also have the meaning, I'm going to be a millionaire before I'm 35. That's meaning, but it's destructive meaning. There is a fellow in Australia who calls himself the Barefoot Investor, who has made himself considerable money, but his meaning of his life is that he is a counselor and advisor for ordinary people to live comfortably, not necessarily to become wealthy, but to invest in a wise way. That's admirable. Now, all of this is a chapter in my most successful recent book, which is From Depression to Contentment, a self-therapy guide. So you start with depression, but it could just as well, the tools I described just as well be for anxiety or addiction or a mixture thereof. I define the problem, then I have a way of doing self-therapy up to the point of being normal. But normal is the walking wounded. Then the last half of the book is from going above normal using the tools of positive psychology, which is marvelous. And one of the most powerful tool of positive psychology is forgiveness. If you can bring yourself to forgive others for the nasty stuff you do, and even more difficult, if you can forgive yourself for your mistakes and harm that you've caused, you grow. The second most powerful is giving. There is a Jewish custom called a mitzvah. And every good Jew is supposed to do at least one mitzvah a day. A mitzvah is a sacred good deed. It can be as small as you like, as long as you can manage to keep it a secret. So if I walk by and I see a poor little spider doing a breaststroke in a bucket of water, I fish it out and save its life. Now, a spider is a sentient being, but not sufficiently knowledgeable to realize that someone has deliberately done it a good deed. So it qualifies as a mitzvah. Or I'm walking and I see a bit of rubbish on the ground. Nobody can see me, pick it up, pop it in the nearest bin. That's a mitzvah. Now, the reason for keeping it a secret is that if I have your acknowledgement, gratitude, understanding that I've done a good deed, then that's my reward. And in modern Jewish philosophy, what they say is, if I steal something and nobody ever finds out but me and the Almighty, then my punishment is that I know that I am a thief. I have become a thief, and that's the punishment. So if I do a good deed and no one but the Almighty and I know that I'm a benefactor, then that's my reward. So I grow. And in Buddhism, there is a similar concept of metta, M-A-T-T-A, which is doing good deeds, basically. So if I wish that you lead a good life, then not only am I of benefit to you, but I grow. So there are various other, and now these are not just religious things. These are well-researched tools of psychology, researched over 20 or 30 years. So the ancient wisdom validated by modern scientific research, and they work.
Yeah. For the most part, there's two things that was discussed in terms of like main topics. The second part, in terms of mental illness, I co-sign basically everything. When I was doing my own introspective of like trying to understand people better, I do think that there are a lot of the things you said is perfectly in line to help these people kind of find the meaning. Um, that includes family. That includes creativity. People undervalue the essence of sleep, overeating or undereating. All of them have extreme innate value. So I co-sign all that. But in regards to consumerism is such an interesting thing to discuss because you listed some of the negatives that can be found with consumerism and like the capitalist society of how people can like basically feed the wealthy is the analogy to put out regarding that. Um, can you indicate any positives that consumerism brought to society?
if I were an evil genius who wanted to destroy all complex life on this planet with as much suffering as possible, I would invent the GDP, the gross domestic product, as the measure, and mechanisms that fall to pieces unless the GDP keeps growing. The modern economy is almost invented to cause suffering.
So you're saying there's no positives?
No.
Okay, what about innovation?
Innovation is something else. That's
Well, in
part of
terms,
creativity. But
well,
look,
okay.
there is a small group, I think about 20 people, who for the past 50 years have had the ecological footprint of 1/10 of their country. They live perfectly good lives. They're not some hermits locked away somewhere. They all have, except the ones who are now retired, because it has gone on for a long time. They all have jobs, families, whatnot, contact with society. But they cause immensely little damage. In my case, way back in the 1970s, I noticed that my electricity bill was 1/4 that of the neighbors. Now it is 1/13 that of the neighbors. So by opting out of being a consumer, I'm actually increasing my disposable wealth. I can afford to do things like my kids have a mortgage, I'm on a pension, I'm on a poverty level. I can save enough money that I can make them an occasional gift to reduce their mortgage. So I actually am wealthier by being poor, by not being a consumer. May sound paradoxical.
No, I completely understand. I think the value of moderation and knowing how to utilize your resources more efficiently is inherently valuable, and then there's a lost art. The only reason why I brought up my initial statement is because at the end of the day, for specifically for something like American society to reach the heights it reach, consumerism is a part of that. At the end of the day, I think there's another aspect of humanity considering, how far we've come. And that's part line with greed. And you could argue it's evil, but that's kind of like the greed of wanting to know more and knowledge and thirst of being greater constantly. Whether or not that's good or bad is completely based on your own subjective moral values, and I'm not going to make a case either way. But one thing I will say to reach the heights we have in terms of technology, social media, and medicine and food, all of that is hand in hand, uh, in line with consumerism. So I think consumerism has negative aspects to it 100%. I also think it has positive aspects to it 100%. I think the problem with it is people nowadays are not being, I don't want to use the word enlightened, but open minded enough to realize that you don't have to be just a cog in the machine, because the wealthy is getting richer and the poor is growing. So people, at the end of the day, and I don't think the answer is destroy the system that put in place, because I think that would be more damaging than not. I think the answer is fixing the problems that currently take place to better fit the middle class and the lower class in some way. How you do that
Well,
is the question, of course.
mm, well, I respectfully disagree. I think consumerism and scientific understanding are independent. The scientific method is the most powerful way of thinking ever invented.
Well, I'm not
And it's
talking about the understanding.
right.
I'm talking
Yeah,
about
no.
the
Yeah, well, technology is
yeah.
science applied to specific practical problems, but uh, it is morally neutral and it's economically neutral. Uh, there can be science can be put in the service of consumerism, or it can be put in the service of uh, building a better world, of building, for example, there is a major movement termed degrowth, and you can look up degrowth.org, and they're using the scientific method to undo consumerism. And if we followed their guidelines, we could be reducing humanity's footprint. And what you've got to realize is that we are now in the sixth extinction event of Earth. We're online. Just right now, there is the biodiversity COP going on in Canada. And 25% of plants and animals are endangered. 1/4 of plants and animals are endangered because of human activity. So this is an emergency. It needs emergency action. What it needs is for all of humanity to pull together. So we don't need Democrat and Republican. We don't need Russian and American or Chinese and American. We're all one people in a sinking boat. And what big business is doing is running around putting holes in the lifeboats while the boat is sinking. That's what we need to address.
Okay. Well, before I tackle that statement, can you define what consumerism for people?
It's the philosophy that you can buy happiness. No. The aim of life is happiness is the first step. As I said, I've got an essay, How to Change the World, which sets it out, and that has a link to a speech I once made, which then has a link to a long list of practical measures you can take. And also on my blog, there is a page accessible from when you go in there, called the 4 R's of Sustainable Use, which is refuse, reuse, repair, and as a last step, recycle. But I lost my train of thought.
No worries.
Sorry, I am an old fellow. What was I saying?
Well, my question was, can you define consumerism?
Thank you. Yes. All right. The first is that the aim of life is happiness, which is false. The aim of life is not happiness. It is enlightenment. We are here going on an ascending spiral with ups and downs, but on the average up, in order to become enlightened. But then the second illusion is that the way to happiness is to buy it. I have wants. I will spend money to enlighten to satisfy my wants. And then the third illusion is that you can satisfy your wants by buying my product. The goods and services I offer is what you need in order to be happy. And then the fourth step is that must not work. If it works, then you buy once and that's it. I want you to keep coming back and buying. So if I'm an architect, I want you to get me design your house. Then in a few years, I want you to get me to design your renovations. And unfortunately, that's not enough. So I must keep getting new customers who want to build houses in more and more places. Therefore, we must have expanding building all the time, replacing nature. Otherwise, I'll go broke. Can't have that. And any other occupation, any other way of making money must continue, keep growing. So we must have a growing economy, and you can't have a growing economy in a limited system. The Earth is a limited system, spaceship Earth, lifeboat Earth, and in fact it's a shrinking system because of human activity since the Industrial Revolution. We have now less arable topsoil, less fresh water, we're mining fresh water, we're mining topsoil, and all sorts of other resources. It's not only climate change. The climate catastrophe is real and terrible, but it's only one of several. Then we live on poison planet. All the agricultural chemicals and the PFAS things and all the stuff that we put in there are killing all life, including humans.
Couldn't you argue industrialization has helped humanity prosper more so than ever before, considering the population has grown tremendously?
Yes, it has, and that's this way. That's this exponential curve, which has now passed the breaking point. We are now plummeting toward extinction. And according to the best current research, we have a maybe at the most 5-year window to turn things around. And we're not. We're still going flat out. The latest meeting on climate change in Egypt still has done nothing. So, but it's okay. Let me assure you, this Earth is a school for souls, and the students are burning it down, but it's okay. There are trillions upon trillions of other schools for souls in the universe, and we may meet in another one.
What do you think about the, I don't know if this is a statement I heard. Someone said humanity's terrible at mitigating catastrophe, but exemplary in terms of adapting to situations. What do you think about that statement?
You can only adapt so far. You can adapt to temperature. I have seen photographs of an Inuit fisherman, bare-chested, standing in a hole in the ice, fishing with a spear. So his bare legs are in the icy water, he's bare-chested, and he's standing there. He can adapt to it. There is a famous man who has swum in the channel between two icebergs in Antarctica. The man who helped him out of the water was all rugged up. You can adapt, but only to a certain point. Even exceptional people like that will die of hypothermia beyond a certain stage. You can adapt to heat. There are people who can live on an extended basis at 42 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is at Fahrenheit, but might be 115, something like, something pretty high. But human beings simply cannot live above a wet bulb temperature above 49 degrees, I think, or 45 it may be, Celsius. You simply die. You get cooked. So when air temperatures sometimes have rise to the 50s, those who can't get out of it will die. So people can do things like wrapping wet sheets around them, or cowering inside with air conditioning on, or hiding underground. But in the recent heat waves in China, people were hiding in the underground train stations because they couldn't survive above ground. It was above 50 in certain locations. And you die. There are limits to adaptation. You can live without water for about 3 weeks. Then you die. There are certain exceptional people who can hold their breath. They train themselves to incredible length of time. Sponge divers do it commercially. And there is a man who's in the Guinness Book of Records for how long he can do it. But at a certain point, you still die.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. Adaptation can only reach a certain point. At the end of the day, the question is, will humanity be able to adapt in consideration to the Earth's change and continue to prosper or not? I think that's definitely the question, and there's obviously a lot of people researching how will there be a breaking point. There's a lot of the very potential catastrophic situations regarding Earth that could potentially happen at any point. So humans have to do what they got to do. I do want to touch upon something that you said earlier in reference to society. You said, well, first you talked about your definition for consumerism. If we're using that definition, I can completely understand why you think it's so problematic. I don't personally apply attention to any of the different components of consumerism. I basically look at it as a system. That's it. But if you do apply there are negative intentions in certain aspects. There are people who think they can buy their happiness, and there are certain corporate individuals who want to keep people a certain way to keep their pockets heavy. So I completely understand that concept, of course. So fixing that is a definite important thing, and that's the question. And then the aspect of we don't need Democrats, we don't really need Republicans, we don't need Chinese America and all that stuff. People have argued that tribalism will always exist, though, and with tribalism, with the difference of either looks, with the difference of status, with the difference of height, capability, ability, there will always be that differences that have one person be more spiteful against another individual. So even in a situation where the potential of for the most part, a very idealistic world. Even in that sense, people have argued that wouldn't even work, considering people will always find differences to hate amongst one another. So, how do you rectify something as such as that?
Okay, there are differences, and it's good there are differences. Some of the differences are in terms of how mature a person you are. You can have adults who act like little 2-year-olds, toddlers. And if you think about a toddler, the 3 keywords are no, mine, and why. Okay? Now, if you take an intelligent person who has that value system, an adult, those people often become leaders because they're not bothered by things like empathy and compassion. They can be ruthless. They can use others as tools. And so not all, but many leaders in business, politics, military are spiritual toddlers. And they have shaped our society. In the 1980s, there was a think tank in Chicago that actually designed today's world. And it was a bunch of spiritual toddlers who decided to shape the world in their image, and they have. And we can do the reverse.
Can you elaborate what you mean by how they created a formula to shape the world?
What's neoliberalism? Liberalism. I haven't looked it up because I did. I'm aware of it some years ago, but they actually set up a program of background influencing politicians to shift society towards what it is now. And they specifically infiltrated the Republican Party in the US and the Conservatives in Britain and so on, and in Australia. And they've created a global movement toward deifying private property, of concentrating wealth in smaller and smaller hands, fewer and fewer hands. But look, the point is that if something doesn't work, doing more of it is not going to work either. If you want to change, you have to change what you do. Albert Einstein said, doing what you're doing over and over and expecting a different result is a definition of stupidity, of insanity. Yeah. So what we have to do differently is, yes, there is tribalism. Yes, there are differences. But if hate, discrimination are frowned upon, if people disapprove of you because you're a spiteful little hater, and people approve of and reward generosity, kindness, decency, then the world shifts that way. Okay? So what we need is an exponential towards sanity to overtake the exponential toward insanity. And that's my answer. And all we can do is the best we can do.
Yeah.
Look, I'm playing basketball and my team is losing by 50 points.
Right.
And I've got the ball and I've got a chance to go for a goal. Should I bother? Should I go and shoot? Yeah. Okay, so we only lose by 47 points.
Yeah.
But I've got to do my best. And that's the situation we're in. I want to, what I'm doing right now while I'm talking to you, to your listeners, to your audience, is because I want them to join my team, to join Greta Thunberg's team, to Noam Chomsky. There are lots of people out there who are pushing them. The British journalist George Monbiot, great writer. He should get the Nobel Peace Prize. Join us. Be on our team. Do our best, and we might cause a miracle. And if we fail, look, one of the stories I tell in my book, Ascending Spiral, which the lowest review it has ever received is a 4. The mostly gets 5-star reviews. So it's a good read. But in 2009, I dislocated my shoulder. Not a good idea. Don't do it. 2 months down the track, my rehabilitation homework for it was to play basketball with myself, which is brilliant. You bounce the ball, you shoot for the basket, you move around, and hey, didn't dislocate. So it's exercise building up muscle strength, it builds up mobility and regains confidence. All right, so go shoot for the basket and I get it in. Beauty, it's a goal. I shoot again and I miss. So what? I'm still exercising my shoulder. Okay? So the reason I'm on this planet is to grow spiritually. By working for survival, by doing my best to be of benefit to all of the sentient beings on this planet, I'm doing their job. If I succeed, if I get people on my team in enough numbers that we cause a miracle, that's a goal. If I fail, I've done the best I could, and that's good enough.
Yeah.
So I would like your audience to visit Bobbing Around, look around. If you're in emotional trouble of any kind, depression, anxiety, addictions, gambling, feeling uncontrollable anger and violence, and you don't want to be that way, send me a private message. I've got a contact form, and I'll be there for you.
Yeah, it's a great message. To kind of elicit my final points in regards to this episode. One, of course, it was a great conversation, very enlightening, of course. I do think that the messages being perpetuated based from you are very valuable and something that I adhere to very much so in terms of the trying to find meaning with love of community, trying to if you're in a dark place where you don't have or you're void of meaning, you have mental health, depression, stuff like that. The pillars, the 7 pillars he elicited earlier, I think are also very much valuable. That's probably the same thing I would say if I created a layout as established as him, of course. So those are inherent ideals that everybody should adhere to. I very much agree to that. So at the end of the day, there's a certain personal and communal level that a lot of this has value. Although I do disagree with the aspect that a lot of this, I don't agree to the aspect that like the current society inherently is just the root of all evil for the most part. You didn't say those exact words, but my thing about it is that I think that American society now, from how it's ran in terms of like the current economic system, has perpetuated innovation that is more beneficial than not. And I do think that the political system is more concrete than any governmental system that's ever existed. That's why it lasted for so long. But at the end of the day, you said something earlier, is that it only can work for so long. You know, you can only adapt to a certain point. And now we have to evolve again. The current system needs to evolve and improve. I don't think it needs to be torn apart, but I do think it needs to be improved. And stuff that the teachings that you elicited could be very much a part of that improvement. And accountability is a very strong part of that improvement for those corrupt individuals that lead that forefront, because they do exist. We all know they exist. And there's a lot of aspects to it that it could lead into potential damage moving forward in the future. So, with that said, that is all we got for today's episode. Of course, all his links will be in the description. It'll be attached on the website, of course, on my website, www.thetrendwithrtlfaith.com. And Dr. or Bob, do you have any final remarks before we wrap things up?
Well, no, I shock you. I agree with you, but my way of thinking can be built into modern technological society. It is perfectly possible. Look, there is a lady somewhere in, I think, California, who has just made the news. She has put out her trash bin for the first time in 26 months. there is a lady in Canada, Catherine Martinko, who lives an extremely sustainable lifestyle. And she's part of the modern world. I'm part of the modern world. But my environmental footprint is a very, let's say a quarter, but probably less than a quarter, than that of my neighbors. We could all reduce our damage in the environment. We could all reduce our damage on each other and still maintain technological culture. Okay?
Yeah, I very much agree. People need to take care of what they're doing, actually pay attention. You don't need to be like mindless sheep just doing who knows what every single day. So, yeah, I co-sign that 100%. So, hope everybody listen. Of course, rated 5 stars. Go check out his books. Go check out his website. His you said WordPress. Like, was it like an essay or just an excerpt?
No, Bob Rich 18 as one word .wordpress.com. But if you put bobbing around Dr. Bob Rich in a search engine, it'll come up.
Of course, check all that out, of course. So, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Y'all take care. You have a good one. Take care and peace.